you haven't seen the last video, to catch you up, these are ideas and concepts for everyone to take and use for future MMORPG games. I'm using my own game idea, Spirit Relics, as an example. Note that Spirit Relics is just an idea, and as of this video, not an actual game in the making. Such a game would require resources that I don't have. This is all just for pretend. But my hope is that someone who does have the resources can take these ideas, so others and I can play a similar game. In the prior video, I talked about foundational concepts that these are built upon. The link is in the description if you want to check that out. With that said, the following is a list of some gameplay and visual features to give you a general feeling on how the main mechanics and experience is set up as a basis for Spirit Relics world building. That way, you're not guessing so much on what game it'll turn into as we talk about the concepts. Keep in mind that these ideas can also change over time as I rewrite and rework things, but I have been working on this for quite some time and feel solid on most concepts. Also note that all of the following summaries will dive into greater detail, starting in the next video. For now, these are a list of things to give you a picture of what shapes Spirit Relics' core mechanics. Overall, Spirit Relics will be set in a medieval fantasy setting. In the beginning, crafting will look more primal, but as characters collect resources, they can build up to more appropriate buildings, attire, weaponry, and crafting. The visuals will be a stylized 3D and mainly cel-shaded. It will probably lean more towards an anime style as I'm a fan of that style. It won't be realistic or hyper-realistic. This gives us more stylistic wiggle room to switch between animations because the more realistic something looks, the more detail has to be put in between animations. This will make it much harder to put in new content as the game receives player content updates. Also, by avoiding realism or hyperrealism, recycled animations can still accurately represent character motions in multiple usages without hitting an uncanny valley. Aside from that, many games that end up doing realism or hyperrealism, first of all, won't age well over time, if not sometimes visually updated. Due to the content I'm planning on having in Spirit Relics, by simplifying the visuals to be more stylized, this can limit the need for visual updates as much as possible, so actual game content and expansions can always be made a priority. But with all this talk about stylization, I promise the stylization of the characters will not be a chibi style, as I am not a fan of that style. In my strong opinion, such a style would be detrimental to the role-playing experience. This might make more sense to artists, but my visual goal would be from 5.5 heads tall to 6.5 heads tall. Later on, I will introduce a new method on how simple textures will be used to show how creatures in the world can have unique visual properties. The simpler these textures are, the easier it is to manage these unique properties, and the easier the textures will blend into each other. At character creation, characters can choose perks that will improve their experience if they want to specialize in certain things, or to impose a role-playing style. Players can choose preset default perks like a smith, a cook, storekeeper, fighter, archer, or survivalist to name a few, or they can select their own set of perks. You can create and save some character templates to reuse quickly, or if you just like creating characters. All characters will be given the same amount of perk points to use. Role-playing perks adds character-specific challenges, where not fulfilling your character's needs will result in debuffs, but fulfilling a character's needs would increase buffs, more so than those who are playing non-role-playing characters. There is still a limit to how many role-playing perks a character can take, and also can't take contradicting perks. If character challenges aren't your style, stick to regular perks, as the game by default is designed to integrate role-playing into the basic experience. Role-playing perks will just give more challenge and can help some players maximize proficiency for a specific playstyle, if they can fulfill the extra challenges. You will see a summary of your choices during the character creation screen to help you know what effects you are selecting. We'll cover lore in a bit, but the two race options are humans and flames. Humans are self-explanatory, however all humans will have a fire-looking wisp or core in their torso, where their body has runic transparent cracks, in which that core can be seen through. Players can choose how big or small these cracks are, from a very open torso to just small runic-looking tattoos. Most clothing and armor types will cover this up. These fire cores tie into the world's lore and many menu mechanics in the game. Flame spirits have coal, stone, or ash-made bodies, with a fire in the place of their heads, but they do have eyes, which are white dots or simple eyes. You can think of Calcifer from Studio Ghibli's Howl's Moving Castle. Kind of similar to humans, you can change your fire core aesthetics, but in a different way. You can choose how visible or strong the fire on your head is. When turned down all the way, the fire on your head will appear weaker, revealing a stone as a head. All equipment, tools, weapons, and attire can be worn by either player types, and skills function the same for both. Upon starting a new game, humans will spawn out of the ground, and flame spirits will fall from the sky, like a meteor or a fallen star. As you craft and build in the world, the aesthetics of everything built will be based on materials used, which at first will be the closest locations to players, with terrains having different themes of fauna, flora, and materials. Thus, players will look culturally localized at first, but trade, exploration, and progress will be the catalyst for new or mixed visual aesthetics. Or players can choose to close themselves off and focus on theming their settlement or property to the local region. This way, if players travel across lands and come across players living in a different region, foreign players will actually feel like foreigners, and local players can spot visitors in a quick way, much like what is seen in fish out of water experiences in fantasy media all the time. Places that trade a lot and are culturally mixed will have a harder time spotting foreigners. This means traveling and trading will support a natural role-playing experience. Lore will be discovered through gameplay, item inscriptions, books, scrolls, NPC dialogue, and inspired quests. The creators of Spirit Relics MMORPG will have design documents to make sure new lore doesn't break the unspoken true history of the world. For example, there will be in-game theories about the extinction of original humans and the appearance of these odd humans with fire-like cores and the flames. Many of them will mention gods and deities being involved, but in different ways. There will be enough said that players will have different interpretations of the possibility of the world's history, but no mechanics will contradict the world's true history and lore, even if an NPC or player has a different interpretation of it. It'll be up to the players if lore is important to their roleplay experience or not based on their actions in-game, but my hope is that the game mechanics and the lore will be enough for players to be invested in it to some degree, as there will be mechanics to interact with supernatural beings like deities and more. As the player performs actions, they will start unlocking new skills, recipes, and quests as prerequisites are hit. The unlocking process is called inspiration, as the character gets inspired to do different or new things. These accomplishments are locked to your character and are stored in your character's fire core. The character's fire core will be the hub for your character's accomplishments and skills unlocked. In MMORPGs, you typically see equipment and skill info by opening a menu. While the same holds true in Spirit Relics, your inner character core will spawn character-specific menus. When the player is looking through or editing their core, the character will be opening this menu in front of them in-game. This is separate from the in-game client to quit the game, where in this instance, the character will look as if they are thinking. However, the thinking animation can stack with the core menu still remaining in front of the character if both are open at the same time. The core menu will hover in front of the character if they are moving, like walking or running if it is still open, whereas the game client menu, like to quit the game, will always close if the character is moving or walking. Players can choose to live on their own, or in a settlement, or among the wild. Communities and properties can be big or small depending on the player's resources and interests. Upon settlement creation, founders can set their type of government or non-government laws and other settings. There will be in-game systems that will allow ownership transfers and governing changes. All buildings will need to be maintained as they will collapse over time if not, or through attacks from monsters and wars. Players can build crafting tables, workstations, and desks. These allow characters to build using collected resources. Players can also create hubs to make settlements, guilds, property, and building management easier. If stagnant settlement isn't your style, you can live nomadically with wild creatures, or just live in the world by backpacking or by living in a wagon. You can set up tents or stay at player or NPC-made inns. Logging in and out at certain areas will give you a small buff multiplier when you come back. These would typically be areas where I would like to promote resting mechanics like camps and tents or rooms with sleeping areas. There are no mobile teleporting options, so you can't just teleport anywhere outside of a settlement. That, combined with death mechanics, will force players to travel carefully and with proper resources. Know that I've kept players' desires for non-combat roles in mind, so there will be mechanics to keep non-combat characters a bit safer from harm than combat-based characters, if they are being passive towards monsters and NPC. Also, the game will be a mix of roguelike and roguelite, where players can build and maintain ways to keep themselves from dying permanently, but there'll always be a potential to permanently die. All humanoid NPCs are bird-like. I don't have a name for them yet, so if you have an idea, let me know in the comments below. Both settlements and personal properties can build empty homes for players or NPCs to take. Special wreaths can be built indicating if the intention is to let a player or an NPC or either to take it. If some time has passed, or if it's an NPC-only building, a random NPC will fly in front of the building and then accept ownership. NPC treatment in settlements and properties will affect their overall percent of productivity and willingness to accept jobs and other interactions, so consider your actions wisely. As players equip weapons, tools, and attire, players will gain spirit based on the spirits of those items. For example, weapons increase combat spirit. Buildings also accumulate spirit based on furniture, tools, weapons, items, and what resources are inside. You can technically think of spirit as a point system. Some examples are, if a player is just wearing clothing items instead of armor, this will give the player passive spirit instead of combat spirit. A tool like an axe could gain gatherer spirit or combat spirit. An axe with gatherer spirit will allow players to gain more wood resources with it. While a battle axe can also be used to cut a tree down, the combat spirit would make it stronger in battle, and it would gather less resources if chopping wood. Combat items will still have your regular RPG elements like strength and defense ratings. You can view your current spirit totals in your core equipment menu. Players can save up to 3 outfits on their character, which is stored inside their fire core, so they can toggle loadouts quickly. Changing outfits will show as a fire or otherwise bright effect, consuming the player briefly before the outfit swaps. You can create more loadout options at craftable loadout stations to toggle in and out of sets quickly, but those will be local to that specific crafted loadout. Players can also have an inventory size set from their core, but can also equip backpacks to increase their inventory space. As these points are being counted, it creates the mathematical system of prerequisites for monster attacks. Note that NPCs contribute to this count, and in some cases, items equipped on a player or in their inventory. Vehicles like wagons, sleds, ships, and otherwise will function similar to buildings, where their spirit total can attract monsters. Settlements, properties, and players will face different monster types and quantities based on their gathered and crafted resources. The more progress is made, the more difficult the monsters are. Thus, the challenges scale dynamically. A small settlement or solo player with few resources will face a monster threat that would make sense for the amount of resources those players have. There would be consideration for combat spirit, for example, players with very advanced armor versus weak armor, but we'll talk more about the calculations later. As the settlement and players grow in size, the monster threats will start ramping up. As for what type of monsters, this is in consideration to in-game world building. Monsters consume player spirit, building spirit, and resources. Monsters have different inclinations for specific resources. For example, if players or solo players start to hoard food, gluttonous monsters will start to appear more often. If ore or other material resources are accumulated, you would see more golem or cave worm-like monsters appear. These themes will consider the terrain type the settlement is in as well. So, in reference to the last examples, settlements focused near ocean waters would have a gluttonous sea-type monster, like a fish with a large mouth, or maybe a stone serpent who likes to consume ore materials. When monsters win, players lose spirit through the destruction of their items and buildings, so the next challenge won't be as hard. If players win, players can collect resources from the monsters to create stronger armor, weapons, and other crafts. Most monsters will have little minions that will spawn during or before encounters that will fight alongside or ahead of them. The players will know how much time is left until a monster encounter will occur. There will be quest options at your settlement hub to clear alerts when players are ready and adjust the encounters. However, if players don't clear the queue of alerts beforehand, the monsters will appear when the time is up, regardless if they are ready. Trading routes will also attract monsters in a similar way, and trading hubs can be created for the distribution of quests to clear the threats. While other MMORPGs have magic users that handle most of the healing and buffing, I believe that by shifting the dynamics back to food, potions, and inns, it will bring more demand back to crafting communities and inns and hotels. So magic will mainly be a combat style, or the middleman between menus and settings. With that said, buffs are gained from food. Food buffs will draw out a player's core magic to increase equipment, tools, and attire proficiency, or to help balance out weaknesses in equipment, or to increase resistances to monster-made illnesses and blights. By adding complexity and quantities, food buffs get stronger. Farmers, fishers, ranchers, and other gatherers will need to work hard alone or together to ensure fighters, or themselves, are well fed for their fights. The player character can eat up to 3 meals before being full, so they will need to strategize what to consume for proper buffs. Eating the same meal will still beef up their buffs and stack, but the same ones. But if a community doesn't have a lot of resources, it would be a good idea to strategize the rationing of meals. After some time, meal slots reopen as the character gets their appetite back. Players can cook their own food, share meals with friends, eat at a restaurant by paying for food, or get a meal voucher by collecting resources for a restaurant. Restaurants can be run by players or NPCs. Warm meals will create the maximum buff effect, but meals can be made ahead of time for more available consistency, or dry foods could do in a pinch. It's up to players on how they want to strategize this. Just know that foods will expire over time. While food will restore health and add buffs, they are consumed slower than potions. Quick healing is done through potions, and rare potions will add buffs or buff multipliers, so there will be a large demand for this as well. Since buffs are done through food, the fisheries, farming plots, ranchers, and other non-combat resources become valued. And if there are non-combat specific players, those who take care of them in turn also have value. This creates a sort of fantasy circle of life where they also keep monsters attracted due to the accumulation of resources. In this way, smiths, fighters, cooks, and store owners can then use the resources from the monsters they defeat, and this keeps the cycle going and going. Strategically, travelers can be sent out as scouts to see what resources lie ahead before the settlement chooses to abandon already established posts and risk destruction. They will need to time expansions with monster threats, which they can see at their settlement hub. Thus, settlement expansions will need to be well coordinated as trade routes can be attacked and inbound and outbound resources can be destroyed. But there will be options to manage a stagnant growth settlement if the players are content with the settlement scale and don't want to constantly expand. If a player just wants to hop on and tend to a small garden or their pets, sometimes living a sort of NPC life is enough for some players, and I welcome that, because it would make the world feel more alive. There will be a system in place for peaceful characters to increase player inspiration when participating in store or restaurant purchases, joining events and festivals, and church systems. If they help with small tasks on properties or settlements, like repairing and maintaining buildings, watering plants, tending to animals, doing NPC quests, and more, the effects will last longer than usual. Monsters will not drop gold or weapons. Their resources are mainly bones, meat, organs, and hide. Players will need to craft using monster parts and other resources in the world to get stronger, like ores from mining or large fish bones and scales from fishing. Fauna are creatures in the world who function like animals. They are the same, where they will not drop gold or weapons. They are attracted to spirit in the wild instead of spirit from players or buildings, or most of the time. There are many ways to interact with fauna and flora alike that doesn't involve just killing them, and there will be mechanics to help them feel alive and dynamic. These mechanics are also available for monsters when they create nests. The visual direction for common fauna will be muted tones and will closely resemble real-life animals. It is only through world-changing events or fauna evolution through player interactions will they start adding visual complexity. The same is true for monsters. Around when towns start building higher reinforcements or traps is when monsters will start looking more designed. Thus, the materials they drop will start changing the player's aesthetics too. Cities will advance this further. Please note that in order to balance a dynamic system between fauna, flora, materials, and players, it is more likely that the server setup for Spirit Relics will be handled via shards, which, to my understanding, are smaller servers with a couple thousand people versus tens or hundreds of thousands of people. I don't know what the computing limitations are for the scope of Spirit Relics, but if it ever were to exist, and if it was financially possible, I think it would still be great to have servers with a little bit more players, but just know that I would want to value the mechanical system balance over just having hundreds of thousands of players on the same server. With all this said, there's no experience bar or loss of experience. It doesn't make sense to gain or lose experience in a specific way, since every moment in the game is an experience that can't be taken away. They just experience the fantasy role-playing life by doing the crafting, gathering, or fighting they're interested in, and if they just do it or not. The items they wear and buffs will make them proficient at it. And remember, each of these topics will have their own video breaking down the mechanics and look and feel of how this can be accomplished, but I feel this covers the mechanical foundation of Spirit Relics. There are many systems that I would love to briefly include, including the questing system, interacting with monster encounters, handling game currency inflation, and how I would even completely overhaul the logging in and out system. But because those things are so different from existing MMORPGs, we're really going to need to tackle them in specific videos, and I think you'll all be excited for this. Any listening game developers may be feeling like this is too much or uncoordinated. Financially it may be, and this is why this is just a video series. However, as this series progresses, and after I introduce many of these mechanics in more specific detail, I'll go over the breakdown of how this could possibly be managed for content updates, scale increases, and minimizing features for demoing and finances. In any case, these are all just ideas, and not an actual game in the making, as I continue to remind viewers throughout this series. Well, I hope you're excited for episode 3, where we will tackle a new system for logging in and out and why the MMORPG genre should consider the mechanics for immersion and role-playing sake. If you like this content and would like quicker releases for Spirit Relics, I recommend you checking out my Patreon. It's pretty bare right now, but if I had the resources, I could pursue this full time. Anyways, hope you enjoyed so far, and I'll see you in the next video.